Okay. So thank y'all all for coming. I'm Tammy. I work for Safety Crisis Center. I'm an advocate for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I hope everyone's doing okay today and having a great Thursday, almost Friday. So the weekend is almost here. There's so much to talk about with sexual assault. So I'm breaking this up into 3 parts. So this week we're going to have our first part, and we're just going to talk about a few things. There's a lot of misinformation about sexual assault. So when people don't understand the truth, things don't always go the way they should. So misinformation can impede the survivor's recovery and create a lot of obstacles for them. And in this webinar, we're going to discuss some very, very, very hard topics about sexual assault and where to go for help. Some of the myths and realities, your rights as a survivor, and how to get the help that you need in order to heal. So here's some things that you will probably need to know. We're going to talk about reasons for medical attention, what your rights are, where do you go, should you report, will this cost money, what medical treatment can you receive, what will the exam be like, and the myths and the realities of all those things. So hopefully I can give you some information and guidance that you can use for yourself as a survivor, if that's what you are, or be of help for those that you love that have fallen victim to sexual assault. So first, here are a couple of statistics. 70% of sexual assaults committed are by a perpetrator known by the victim. 2 in 5 women in Texas have been sexually assaulted. 1 in 5 men have been sexually assaulted, and then 6.3 million Texans have experienced some form of sexual assault. So if you find yourself or a loved one that has been a victim of sexual assault, first just let me say I'm so sorry. You don't deserve what happened to you. I also want you to know that you are not defined by what has happened to you. You are a survivor, and I would love for you to see yourself in that light. So for now, but for now, you may need some medical attention. So let's take a quick look at the process. First, you would go to your local emergency room, and emergency rooms at hospitals are very busy places. So it would be nice to say that you would be treated immediately, but typically this is not the case. It may take some time before you are treated. You may want to notify someone to come be with you for support. You may also ask someone to bring you a change of clothes because your clothing may be needed for evidence. The first thing to remember is to not take a bath or a shower before coming to the hospital. Do not wipe anything or brush your teeth or clean your face. The nurse will swab for evidence and collect DNA, and it's important to not wash any evidence away. If you've not already reported the assault before arriving to the hospital, law enforcement may be called to the hospital in order to get the reports and get as much information as they can. They want to identify the perpetrator and make an arrest, if at all possible. The hospital will call a specialized nurse to come and do the exam, and those are called SANE nurses, and SANE is an acronym for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, and they are specialized in their field. We have some incredible SANE nurses in our East Texas region, and we work really well with them. The hospital will also call the Safety Crisis Center if you're in our region. They'll call our hotline, and we'll send out an advocate that is on call to the hospital to be with you and provide information and resources that you may need, as well as get a little bit of information from you to make sure that you get the help that you need. An advocate is one who pleads the cause of another. So that advocate from safety will be there on your behalf and advocate for you to the hospital staff, the law enforcement, and help the SANE nurse as needed. They'll be there to hold your hand, listen to your needs, and give you the attention that you need. So any wait in the emergency room, no matter how long or short it's going to be, is going to be uncomfortable. So you may want to take this time to just concentrate on yourself and your health. You have the right to whatever medical treatment you need. So there are 4 very important reasons why you may need medical attention. One is to determine if you've been injured in any way. Following an assault, the survivor is frequently in a state of shock and may not be aware of their injuries. Number 2, important reason is to take the first step towards regaining control of your life. When you tell someone that you were assaulted, you begin to take back control of your life and break that spell the perpetrator had on you. Number 3 reason is to be tested for and treated possibly for any STIs and to discuss treatment and prevention options available in regards to sexually transmitted diseases or pregnancy. Number 4 is to collect medical evidence for possible further prosecution if and when a suspect is caught. It's vital that the evidence be collected as soon as possible. It will be destroyed as time passes and you begin to resume everyday activities like eating, drinking, urinating, bathing, and so forth. So they really need to get and collect that evidence as soon as possible. So let's go over a few questions that you may have, like what are your rights? You may be asking, what are your rights? The Texas law gives you the right to receive an examination for medical treatment and to have evidence collected, and you have this right even if you decide not to make a police report. You also have the right to have a sexual assault advocate present during your examination. Many victims find the presence of an advocate, pretty helpful. Advocates provide support and counseling, and they're specially trained on your legal rights during this time of crisis. And if no one offers you an advocate, you can request one from the nearest sexual assault program. Also, it's not consent because you said yes the last time. It's not consent if you're under 16. It's not consent if you're out of it, if maybe you've been drugged. And it's not consent if you're too scared to say no. So where should you go? Depending on what hospital you arrived at, you might have a choice whether to receive the exam. Some hospitals have a specially trained sexual assault nurse, but others do not. If you're at a facility without a SANE, Texas law gives you the right to choose whether to be transferred to a SANE facility or to receive an examination where you are. Should you report? Law enforcement officials say it's best for the criminal investigation for victims to report as soon as possible. But if you aren't ready, you can have evidence collected and preserved confidentially for up to 2 years. And that way the evidence will still be there if you choose to report later. Many survivors choose this option if they need time to think and process what's happened. If you do get an exam without reporting to police, the hospital will assign a confidential identification number to your evidence. The evidence and ID number will be sent to the Department of Public Safety. If you want to report to police at a later date, be sure and get that number from the SANE nurse and write it down so that you can retrieve it at a later date. The DPS office will store your evidence confidentially for up to 2 years, and then after 2 years, it's destroyed. If you do choose to report right away, the SANE nurse will give you a tracking number so that your evidence can be tracked through the system. And when it is being tested, you'll be given a username and a password that you can later change once you are in the site. But you won't be able to see the results, but you'll know where that evidence is at. You'll be able to track it from one office to the other and know where it is at all times. So let's see. My slide is not working. Hang on. Whoops. Okay, well, this costs money. No matter whether you make a police report or not, police will pay for the forensic portions of the exam. However, you will be billed for the medical portions that are unrelated to the evidence. If you do choose to report to police, you will be eligible for reimbursement through the Crime Victims Compensation Program. And you'll be given the paperwork there at the hospital through the same nurse or the hospital staff, and an advocate will help you fill that out at the time of the exam. So what medical treatment can I receive? It should include the following, but not necessarily in this order. You'll have your blood pressure checked, your pulse, temperature. They'll ask for your medical history, your allergies, the medicines that you take. You'll be asked questions like when your last menstrual period was. And at this time, you should be told what to expect during the examination by the advocate or the sane nurse. Before the examination, you'll be asked about the sexual assault. And it's very important that you tell someone what happened during the attack. You may want to point to pictures rather than talk in detail about what happened, and that's perfectly okay. You may be in a state of shock and not understand the questions, or you may just feel embarrassed when you have to answer them. So it's all right to feel uncomfortable. You just let the nurse or the doctor or the advocate know of your discomfort, and feel free to ask questions as needed. You're not expected to know all the medical terms, so don't be afraid to ask for explanations. After all of the paperwork is completed, you'll be asked to undress, and if you're wearing the clothes you wore at the time of the assault, these clothes will be taken into evidence. The nurse should put those items in a separate paper bag, and the paper bags will be sealed and stored with the rest of the evidence that is collected. You'll most likely not receive your clothes back, although it may be possible after the investigation and prosecution is complete. You can probably request them back after that time. Often the hospital will have a change of clothes that you can wear home if you haven't brought another change of clothes. The exam will typically last for 2 to 3 hours, sometimes longer, depending on how far the sane nurse has to travel. As part of the exam, swabs, hair samples, and blood samples will be taken. In addition, photographs of injuries may be taken as well. Collection of evidence may not always be comfortable, but it's very important to the case if you are wanting to prosecute. So feel free to ask for a break if you need it. So what would the exam be like? Sorry. Getting a little ahead of myself. I don't do these webinars too often to know about the technology part of it, so that's kind of intimidating for me. So just bear with me just a second. Okay, what will the exam be like? Yes. Before beginning the exam, you'll be asked to sign consent forms allowing medical evidence to be collected, and then that will be turned over to the law enforcement. Medical evidence will not be collected if you do not sign the forms. So if you want to prosecute and you want this to go to trial, you will need to do fill those consent forms out. If you need help filling them out, or have any questions, be sure to ask the Safety Crisis Center advocate or the SANE nurse or the hospital staff. The SANE nurse is specifically trained in sexual assault examination and will tell you about the exam and what to expect to kind of alleviate some of your fear and kind of make you feel comfortable. They should also tell you that it is your right and the law to have a support person present during the exam if you desire. After you have talked about the exam, they will ask you to give a brief description of the assault so that they will know where to look for injuries and evidence. The same nurse will listen to your heart, lungs, press on your abdomen and back, examine your chest, and check for general sign of injury. If you have any areas of pain, soreness, or discomfort, be sure to mention them to the nurse. Typically, marks and bruises will be noted on your medical chart, but sometimes it takes a while for them to appear, and they can appear from 6 to 21 days later. But after the nurse listens to you, you'll be asked to remove your clothing while you stand over a large piece of paper, and the piece of paper is to catch evidence, loose hairs and debris that may fall from your clothes. The nurse will help you put each piece of clothing into a separate bag. So you'll be provided with a hospital gown, and the nurse will start collecting the evidence. So evidence that will be collected through the swabs would be the oral swabs, hair combings, pulled head hair samples, debris collection of dried blood, semen, saliva, hair, dirt, leaves, fibers that may be on you. They'll collect anal swabs, vaginal or penile swabs, pubic hair combings and samples, fingernail scrapings, blood sample, saliva sample. Collecting swabs, it's painless, typically painless, and involves merely just wiping cotton swabs over the area where the evidence may be. Collecting hair samples may be uncomfortable since the hairs typically need to be pulled. Following the general examination, pelvic or internal exam will be done on the females, and the exam for the male victims will be similar to the one females have. But for females, the pelvic exam will be almost identical to the exam that you've received from your own doctor. So if you've never had a pelvic exam, you need to be sure and let the same nurse know. The nurse will be looking for any tears or bruising. The nurse will also swab for any possible DNA. Since this procedure may be very similar to the assault you've just endured, you may find yourself losing control of your emotions. And it's okay to cry and let your feelings out. That's okay. And that's what that advocate is there for, to hold your hand and just help you through that process. You may want to ask the nurse to wait for a moment before the examinations continue. So it's okay to take breaks. You'll be given information about sexually transmitted infections. And you may also be tested for STIs. But at this time, typically when you come in after the assault, it's probably too early to detect any STIs. But testing and treatment will depend on your individual circumstances. So also female victims of childbearing age should be asked to give a blood or urine sample for pregnancy test. You should be offered options concerning pregnancy. And if those options aren't offered, ask someone about them. Chances of becoming pregnant are very small, about 5 times out of 100, but you may want to talk about possible pregnancy in your options with a rape crisis center. We also work well with Northeast Texas Heart of Hope, which is a wonderful resource that we refer to a lot as well. And I'll have those numbers at the end of this webinar. If you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs at this time, at the time of the attack, you may feel that your ability to resist the assault was impaired. The presence of substances in your system can be used against your attacker to show your lack of consent. Therefore, you can ask the same nurse to take a blood and urine test for traces of alcohol and drugs. And with the drugs, they get out of your system pretty quickly. So you want to, and I'll go over this in a second if you've been drugged. So I'm getting there. Trying to get ahead of myself. Okay, if you think you've been drugged, stage 1 is prepare. You need to call a friend. You'll need someone with you that can think clearly, because chances are the drugs are making it hard for you to think. If you have to go to the bathroom, collect some urine at that time, put it in the cleanest jar or cup you can find, and then you can put a plastic around the top with a rubber band. You're going to bring this to the hospital with you. I know this probably sounds weird or gross, but if you choose to press charges later, you'll need that evidence. So drugs used to facilitate rape leave the body quickly, and they are rarely found for evidence purposes. So it's very important that you go ahead and put that in a cup and bring it with you. Do not clean up in any way, like bathing, douching, brushing your teeth, drinking or eating anything, or changing clothes, because washing will destroy all the evidence that they're going to be collecting. Stage 2 would be to call. Find the nearest rape crisis center, and I'll give these numbers at the end. The National Sexual Hotline, operated by the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, which is we call the RAINN, RAINN, Or if you're in the 8 counties that Safety Crisis Center serves, then you would call our hotline number, and that hotline number will be at the end of this webinar as well. When you call the Crisis Center hotline, tell them that you think you've been drugged. You'll also need to ask some specific questions. Like, is there a specific location, hospital that you should go to that would include a SANE nurse? Can an advocate from the Safety Crisis Center meet you at the hospital? All rape centers have advocates on call 24 hours a day who've been prepared to meet you and will help you through the process. Another question is, does someone, either the crisis center or I, need to call the hospital and let them know that I'm coming? I know in the East Texas area, many SANE nurses work on an on-call basis, and they may not live in the county that you may be going to, so they're going to have travel time. So a phone call ahead of time may mean less waiting time for you. And another question you may ask is, will law enforcement be called? If you're a minor at age 17 or under, the hospital is required by law to contact the police. And if you're 18 years or older, the hospital is not legally bound to notify the authorities. But some hospitals have policies requiring notification of all the sexual assaults to the police right away. You do have the right to refuse to report your attack, even if the authorities are called. However, drugs used by rapists leave the body quickly, and if you don't report now, law enforcement cannot store the evidence of any drugs the attacker may have used. So you'll not be and also you will not be eligible for reimbursement of hospital expenses through the crime victims compensation. And the third stage is go. Now it's time to just go to the hospital. Have that friend or someone else drive you, because those drugs still may be making you impaired. And bring the urine that you collected with you so that it can be tested. You should also know that it's important in this situation to report to police. If you choose to get a medical forensic exam without reporting, police won't be able to test your urine for drugs. So it's really important to report if you can. But right now, your main concern is getting to the hospital to get checked out. So the nurses and advocates will do their best to take care of you while you're there. You may also be asking yourself, how could this happen to me? There are many notions of what rape is and who gets raped and who the rapist is and where should such crimes occur. Many of us have never really thought about attacks until they happen. And after a sexual assault, many of us think, if only I had done this or done that, I wouldn't have been raped or hurt. Maybe if we knew some of the facts about rape, we would learn that we, as victims and survivors, are not to blame. Understanding those facts can help you deal with sexual assault. You can discuss your own feelings and ideas about rape with a rape crisis counselor or an advocate from safety who knows the realities of sexual assault. There are lots of myths and realities of sexual assault. Let me get back to it. Oh, I didn't mean to go to the end. I'm not working this PowerPoint very good, am I? I'm so sorry. I apologize. Okay, myths and realities. So there's a lot of myths and realities of sexual assault. So let's go through a few of them. Myth number one, it could never happen to me. The reality is everyone is vulnerable to sexual assault. Rapes committed against all types of people, including females and males of any age, race, class, religion, occupation, educational background, or sexual orientation. Another myth is most rape occurs as a spur of the moment act in a dark alley by a stranger. The reality is most rapes are planned and often occurred in one's home. Many times the offender is a relative, a friend, a neighbor, or an acquaintance of the victim. A rapist will commit multiple rapes, generally in the same area of town and in the same manner. Another myth is rape is primarily a sexual crime. The reality is rape is a violent assault that is acted out sexually. It violates not only the victim's personal integrity, but also his or her sense of safety and control over their life. Another myth is women secretly want to be raped. This is crazy. The reality is fantasy is not the real thing, and women who do fantasize about rape usually think of rape only as aggressive sex. These fantasies do not reflect what rape really is: a violent, often brutal, terrorizing, and humiliating assault. Regardless, fantasizing is just that, a fantasy. It does not mean that a woman wants the fantasy to occur in reality. Another myth is a rapist is easy to spot in a crowd. Most rapists appear to be average people. Most are married and young, and they can be of any race, color, or economics class. And the first coming to my mind is Ted Bundy. He was an attractive, smart, charismatic, an aspiring lawyer who dabbled in politics. Women, just automatically relaxed around him and trusted him. And he had friends and a family and a serious girlfriend, and even worked at a suicide hotline. Bundy admitted to raping and killing 36 women, but I think experts think that the numbers reached into the hundreds, if I'm correct. Another myth is rape is a nonviolent crime. The reality is rape is a violent crime. 87% of rapists either carry a weapon or threaten the victim with violence or death. Forcible rape is increasing in this country more than any other violent crime. Another myth is only young women are raped. The reality is rape occurs to victims of all ages. In the United States, there are reports of rape victims ranging in age from just days old to close to 100. People of all ages, socioeconomic groups, neighborhoods, and lifestyles can be victims. Another myth is some victims are asking for it by the way they dress or their actions. The reality is, as I stated above, most rapes are planned. No person asked to be hurt or degraded. Research shows that rapists are looking for available vulnerable targets, not victims who dress or behave in a particular way. Another myth is it's not really possible to rape a non-consenting adult. The reality is it is indeed possible to rape a non-consenting adult. Fear of death, threat of violence, or physical brutality can paralyze anyone. Another myth is as long as you stay away from dangerous places and dangerous people, you will not get raped. The reality is there's no way to guarantee that sexual assault will never happen. There are ways to reduce risk and increase safety, but despite being prepared, there are many factors which are not in our control. No matter what the situation, it's never the victim's fault. So what are my rights? As a crime victim or a witness, you have the right to receive from law enforcement and agencies protection from harm and threats for cooperating with prosecution efforts. You have the right to have your safety and the safety of your family considered in the setting of bail for the offender. You have the right to be informed about relevant court proceedings, including appellate proceedings, and to be informed prior to the event if those proceedings have been canceled. You have the right to be notified of the existence and terms of a plea bargain agreement offered to the defendant before the agreement is accepted by the court. You have the right to be informed concerning the defendant's rights to bail, the procedures in criminal investigations, and the general procedures in the criminal justice system. You have the right to provide pertinent information on the impact of the offense to be considered at the time of sentencing and parole. You have the right to information regarding compensation to victims of crime and referral to available social service agencies that may offer additional assistance. You have the right to be informed of parole proceedings, to participate in the parole process, to be notified of parole proceedings. I'm sorry, I just said that twice. To provide to the Board of Pardons and Paroles information to be considered and to be notified by the defendant's release. You also have the right to receive information on the status of evidence collected during your medical forensic exam. You can find this information anonymously by using the statewide electronic tracking system that I talked about earlier for sexual assault evidence. Hospital personnel, law enforcement, or a victim advocate can tell you how to use that tracking system. You have the right to be provided with a separate and secure waiting area before testifying in any proceeding concerning the offender. You have the right to prompt return of property held as evidence when it is no longer required. You have the right to have your employer notified if testifying requires absence from work. You also have the right not to be penalized by your employer for complying with a subpoena. You have the right to have counseling regarding acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and that is HIV and AIDS, if the offense creates the need. You have the right to be present of all court proceedings related to the offense, subject to judge's approval. You have the right to request victim offender mediation coordinated by the Victim Services Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And you have the right to information and an explanation about these rights. And as a patient, you have the right to receive a medical forensic examination for medical treatment and to have evidence collected. You have the right to be presumed mentally competent unless the court has ruled otherwise. You have the right to a clean and humane environment in which you are protected from harm, have privacy with regard to personal needs, and to be treated with respect and dignity. You have the right to appropriate treatment in the least restrictive, appropriate environment available. You have the right to be free from mistreatment, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. You have the right to be told in advance of all estimated charges being made. You have the right to have your records kept private, except for their use in the criminal case, and to be told about the conditions under which information that can be disclosed without your permission. You also have the right to be informed of the current and future products of special observation, such as one-way mirrors, tape recorders, or photographs. You have the right to refuse treatment, and you have the right to request that a rape crisis counselor accompany you in the examining room, which would also be like an advocate from safety if you choose. So do I have to report to the police? Get out of here. There are a lot of advantages and some disadvantages for reporting. Before your physical examination in the ER, you may have already contacted the law enforcement. And if you didn't, it's important for you to understand that many, like I said earlier, that hospitals automatically contact law enforcement once you're there. This doesn't mean that you're obligated to make a crime report. They're just going to get the information anyway or be called. If you decide to report the assault, the first step is a crime report, which may be made before or after the examination in the emergency room. And within a few days after the initial report at the hospital or before, the special sexual assault investigators may call you into their office or come by to do a follow-up report. So it's important that you be truthful in your statements to the best of your ability. You still may be in shock and suffering from memory gaps and may need time to process the account. And sometimes memories come back as you begin to process. So, and that's totally okay, because inaccurate or incorrect information may cause law enforcement to follow false leads. So you want to be sure that you get it right. And when those memories come back, you may want to get back in touch with them to let them know. They're going to want to know and ask you questions regarding your name, your address, your phone number, and your place of work. And if you're employed or if you're unemployed, it's okay to say no. They're not there to judge you. Don't worry about your unemployment or resident status. They're just there to obtain the information about the crime, the date and the time of the crime, and the location and the description of the suspect. So they're just there. They're not there to judge you. They're just there to help you. You'll also be asked about your activities before and after the assault. They'll also need to know whether any penetration occurred and what sexual acts were forced on you, to determine what crimes can be charged. And they're not just asking for their information. They it will the slightest penetration may result in an assault charge rather than an attempted assault charge. So that will make the difference. And that's why all the questions are being asked. So that's why they want the best account that you can give them in your statement. And even though you're embarrassed, it's still very important that you give them all the information that you can remember, or that you can give them. And remember, it's not you that did these things, it's the assailant. The information you provide to the investigators is, like I said, is the basis of legal proceedings. And so it must be accurate. Like I said, if you remember something later that you may not have told the law enforcement, just call them with the information. If you remember details a little differently later on, make sure to clarify this with the enforcement or the investigators as well. And in some cases, officers may ask you questions about your mental state, and that's only in order to determine whether or not you may need to be referred to counseling to help you deal with the emotional reaction to the assault. In making the decision of whether or not to report the crime, keep the following facts in mind. There are advantages, and if you report the crime, the suspect rapist is caught and convicted, and you may have protected others from falling victim to the rapist. Also, your reporting may help to strengthen another survivor's report and give them the courage to come forward. You'll also be eligible for crime victims compensation provided by the state of Texas, and that will help in the cost of the hospital bills. You can also, another advantage is you can request assistance throughout the trial process from victim advocates and or crisis counselors. And this isn't listed, but if you are in the 8 counties that safety services, you'll qualify for all of safety services such as legal counseling, groups, shelter, and all the other services that safety offers. There are some disadvantages of reporting. It may be difficult for you to repeat your story over and over again. It may seem like 100 times that you're telling it over and over again. And that may be very hard for you to go through and relive, because there may be flashbacks, and you may be reliving the assault experience, and that's just really hard on the victim. Even if you report the crime and choose to press charges, the district attorney has the right to decide whether or not to prosecute the case. And if the DA does not file, you're entitled to know why. And then another disadvantage is fewer than 1 out of 5 cases goes to trial, and fewer result in conviction. This does not mean that your particular case will not be filed, but the statistics are just not encouraging at this point. So what happens in court? What happens in court? If the suspect is caught and the case against the suspect proceeds to court, you'll be subpoenaed to testify as a witness at a preliminary hearing. A subpoena is a court order requiring your attendance at a certain time and a certain date. So please make sure to read the subpoena carefully and be certain to appear at that place and date and the time that's noted on the subpoena. If you have any questions or problems about the subpoena, you can always call the district attorney's office or the victim witness division. It's always best to call the district attorney's office like the day before your appearance is required. They can advise you on any of the delays in the proceedings and prevent you from making like any unnecessary trips. They can also go over the process of what's going to happen in court with you and help you with your testimony. So it's always important to call them like at least the day before the court proceedings. So in court, it will not be you versus the rapist. Your role will be as a witness. So the people of the state prosecute the suspect because the suspect is charged with committing a criminal act, and you have the right to have your own attorney present if you wish. The preliminary hearing is generally a short process in which just the basic details of the crime are disclosed. So what must be established, though, is that the assault occurred and that there's a reason to believe that the suspect did it without your free consent. Between the preliminary hearing and the actual trial, typically some delays may occur, and the delays are typically requested by the defense attorney representing the defendant. It may take days, it could take weeks before the trial actually begins. So and it's not uncommon. Very few cases actually go to jury trial. So many defendants plead after the preliminary hearing. So that's a good thing. So in these cases, a preliminary hearing may be the only appearance required of you. Should a trial occur, the case is decided by a judge or jury based upon witnesses' testimony and the physical evidence. To be convicted, a defendant must be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, a defendant has the constitutional right to confront witnesses against him or her. So the defense attorney has the right to question you. The defense attorney may try to attack your credibility in different ways, including or suggesting that you're mistaken in your identity, or that you're not getting your facts straight. And I can say this personally, I was on a jury trial myself for a sexual assault charge. And trust me when I say that when they do that, when the attorney for the defendant does that, the jury can see straight through these lines of questioning. So just relax and know that you're to be believed. So the defense attorney is just doing his job in representing the defendant, and he wouldn't be doing a good job if he didn't give due process and ask questions like that. It is hard. The sentencing hearing may follow the trial, and this is an open public hearing you may want to attend. In an effort to feel more comfortable in the courtroom and to have a better understanding of the criminal proceedings, you may wish to contact the district attorney's office or the victim witness division, or your legal or medical advocate or your counselor to be there with you. So the usual order of events is I've provided a graph. Is shown in the graph on the PowerPoint. You'll file a criminal report with law enforcement, and you may look at mugshots or assist in making a composite picture. A suspect may be arrested. You may be required to identify the suspect in a lineup. The law enforcement present the case to the district attorney, and you may be interviewed by the DA's office, and the DA decides whether there's enough admissible evidence to prevent the case to the grand jury. So if indicted and if suspect pleads not guilty, several hearings will be set which the suspect must attend, and you may be subpoenaed to appear at those hearings. And then there may be a trial and you'll be required to attend. And then there will be either an acquittal or the sentencing phase. And you may also want to ask, and you may want to file a civil suit. You may be unhappy with the criminal proceedings. So before, during, or after the trial. And so you'll have to retain your own attorney for the civil suit. And let's see, I'm just having computer issues. I'm sorry. So let me back up. There's just so much information with surviving sexual assault. So next week we're going to talk about, well, what about me? What am I feeling? Where do I go from here? How will my family react? Will I ever feel safe again? And then we'll talk about child sexual assault and the realities. And then the following week we'll just discuss sex trafficking. So there's just so much information out there, but I wanted to start with the basics of what happens when it just first occurs. So I hope that kind of clears some things up. But if you or a loved one have been sexually assaulted, please contact our office at Safety Crisis Center or call our hotline to talk with someone. And here I'm going to leave these up for a minute for you to write down, or you can take a quick picture. And then I'm going to go to see if anyone has shared any questions in the chat box. So hang on. Okay, no questions, just comments. So thank you all for joining in, and I hope to see you next week.